Um, Hello, everyone who joined. I can see some familiar names and some not familiar names, which is nice. Um, my name is Lucy, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Green Team. We're a youth-run, volunteer-based environment group, and this is sort of part of our new talk series, Think Talks. Yeah, so I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm speaking on, which is the Gadigal people, and pay my respects to those past, present, and emerging. Yeah, so I'm really excited to be speaking to Henry about localization and, yeah, on the topic of localization, the most meaningful solution to the climate crisis. Yeah, so basically it'll sort of work in a kind of loose Q&A style. And then if you have questions, just jot it down in the chat, and then we'll answer them at the end if they're not already spoken about. Yeah, so this is Henry, everyone,
Hey
and
folks.
I think he'll probably give you a better idea of his work. But he is a project coordinator and big picture activist with Local Futures, and this work's taken him throughout Australia, India, and the UK. He's a writer, speaker, and workshop facilitator, and works closely with the Local Futures founder, Helena Norberg Hodge. So hello. I guess
Hey Lucy,
we'll
hey everyone.
hello, hello. I guess, yeah, can you just tell me a bit about Local Futures and its work?
Yeah, sure. So we're a pretty small but international organization, pioneers of the localization or new economy movement, and have been kind of going at it for almost 40 years, basically with three main aims. One is to raise awareness about localization, about what it is and about how it can solve so many of our global problems at once, how it is a solution multiplier. Um, Another main aim is to bring groups who are already involved in localization, as there are countless thousands throughout the world on the small scale, bring them together in networks that can demand policy change, because we do need systemic change for localization to, really come to the forefront. And another main aim is to help other people start smaller initiatives by helping to encourage them with best practice localization initiatives. So yeah, at the moment we're working on a community guide that's really aimed at catalyzing that kind of action at the
Cool.
grassroots level. Yeah.
Yeah, sweet. And I think we'll get more into like the policy sort of side of it later. But yeah, I just wanted for everyone to understand what your definitions of localization, globalization, and big picture activism were.
Yeah,
Thanks.
sure. Thanks. Yeah, pretty important. When we talk about globalization, which is kind of what we're really critiquing, we're specifically talking about economic globalization, corporate deregulation, corporate rule. It goes by many names, global capitalism, but it's basically a system that started in colonialism with centralized powers and big traders consolidating wealth and systemically decimating local economies throughout the world. And in the modern day, that has continued through the World Trade Organization, the GATT, organizations which are basically trying to harmonize, as their language, global trade. But what it really means is deregulating multinationals while making it harder and harder for small scale, place-based local economies to survive. So that's what we're critiquing. Localization is a systemic process in the other direction. It's a process of re-regulating multinationals that have far too much power, resubmitting business and banks to rule made by democracy, rather than having the business and banks shaping society and culture. And, even so, that's kind of the systemic side of things, but even down to the grassroots, we're talking about rebuilding and renewing that local economic fabric that really holds people together in community, and and communities together with their local ecosystems in a kind of interdependent web. And that is, how we evolved. That is really, we see a prerequisite for genuine sustainability, as well as genuine peace and genuine human well-being. So we're talking about that systemic process, and it's important to say that it is a process. It's like, we're not saying, oh, we're all going to go to only sourcing everything we need within a 50-mile radius overnight. We're talking about systemic steps, linking up city with regional producers, just acknowledging where we are now, and instead of going down this path of corporate globalization and, should be said, high-tech development and advancement, to choosing a path that is about coming home to nature and to community. Big picture activism, quickly. Sorry, I've been...
no, that's okay.
But yeah, quickly, big picture activism is getting that picture out there. So we, seeing how so many of our crises are linked, economic crises, ecological crises, humanitarian, mental health crises, all are exacerbated by or created by an economy, a global system that is too big for its own boots. And then showing how there's this systemic path. So it is a form of awareness raising. It's what we're doing now. And yeah, that's why I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, thank you. And like, how did you get involved with Local Futures? Because it's not based in Sydney, is it?
No, but funnily enough, I found it when I was growing up in Sydney. The community garden, the local community garden, screened The Economics of Happiness, which was their documentary that was made in 2011, that really kind of put together that picture and showed, critiquing globalization and showing the solution multiplier that is localization, showing that it's already happening all around the world. So that documentary really, for me, was so important because it really dispelled this idea that human well-being and ecological well-being are fundamentally separate and mutually exclusive goals. So that was an idea that really paralyzed me when I was younger, and I think it still paralyzes so many environmentalists. So yeah, we're talking about the documentary got rid of that, and I was like on board with it. So I started kind of volunteering with them after I finished high school, over in Ladakh, India, which is where the whole organization started up and where we learnt about all of these issues from Ladakh and the people of Ladakh. And then since then, I've been kind of working closely with the founder, who is also a huge inspiration to me, Helena Norberg Hodge.
Cool.
So just been kind of going on that path.
More like remotely, kind of.
I mean, we do a lot of writing. We do a lot of online event organizing because, the paradoxic kind of thing is we need to localize, but we need to localize globally. We need to get the message out there. And it is, I think, one of the most exciting things about this time is that people are really picking up on it. People are really, especially after the coronavirus pandemic, even governments are thinking, we shouldn't be so dependent on global trade. And, we need community. We need the fabric of community for resilience in the face of any crisis. So people are really picking up on it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think, there hasn't ever been anything like this that has, provoked this kind of this is actually a really exciting opportunity we have now to really readdress our food systems and our economic systems and everything like that. So that's really exciting, I think, for sure. So I don't know if anyone read the article that I posted on the Green Team, but Henry recently wrote a really beautiful article called What to Do When the World is on Fire. And I just really aligned with a lot of the thinking. And I was telling Henry before, it's just really beautifully written. But I just wanted to say, for those who hadn't read it, there's a little excerpt that I'm going to read. So you mentioned that we need to overcome the serious delusion that industrial modernity is the only way, the toxic cocktail of corporate globalization, high-tech development and urbanization is not inevitable, and it cannot offer any meaningful solution to the crises that has created. So for those who haven't read the article, what is the solution that you offer instead, and how did you learn so much about land-based futures?
Yeah, okay, cool.
So it's a big question.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing to say is that I am just trying to put out this call to young environmentalists, all these people who really care for the future of the planet and for our own futures, that we need to reject this this idea of progress through globalization, corporatization, and technological advancement. You know, we need to reject that idea of the future that's constantly being broadcast to us, that we're going to be living in spaceships and we're going to be eating food from that's grown in indoors with synthetic, whatever, blah blah. We need to reject that, because it can only make these crises worse. Honestly, it's only going to remove us further from our relationships with the natural world, and deepen the dependence, deepen the addictions that we have to this top-down system of control. So what I'm saying is that one of the most important forms of activism, especially for young environmentalists, is to envision land-based futures, decentralized futures, futures where we're providing for our needs in community and not dependent on a extremely resource intensive, extremely destructive global monoculture to provide for what we need. And and in that, the best part about that is that in that there's the chance not only to minimize our negative impact, but to maximize our regenerative impact, and to build economies that stimulate diversification on the land. Particularly, food economy is the center of the economy, something we forget in our high-tech world, but food economy is the most important. Diversifying production for local markets, rather than producing thousands of kilometers squared of perfectly straight carrots for the supermarket. By diversifying, we actually rebuild ecosystems on the land, draw down carbon, draw down more than 100% of the carbon that we are emitting, and provide the soil structure that allows water to seep into aquifers, keeps rivers flowing, keeps streams flowing, brings species back, and at the same time, all the human benefits. So, food security of our basic needs, community, having long-term relationships with one another in our local areas, so we don't feel isolated, and so that we don't get depressed and always trying to live up to this external image, trying to be famous in the global market. Strip back all of that and rebuild the structures that a human being really needs to flourish, as well as regenerate the land. So yeah, that's kind of an overview of the optimistic vision that I have and that we have at Local Futures, if we can really support that process of systemic localization.
Yeah. Oh, you so beautifully articulated that. And when you're talking about like more hands on the land, and needing like policy to help that transition, kind of what we were talking about before. Why do you, and like, I mean, I agree with you about you need policy to support this transition, and obviously make it fair and just for everyone who's jumping into it. But there's lots of people that would probably argue that they can create those communities away from policymakers. I just wanted to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's true to an extent. People can do this from the ground up, even without the support of policy. We're seeing a flourishing of farmers markets, flourishing of things like community gardens, and we have for decades been seeing this. So we know that that the first steps can be taken even without the support of policy, and that's really important, because you know, these are lifeboats of ecological health, lifeboats of community health that are real. And even if we
Yeah.
don't achieve policy change, they're still, you know, they're the lifeboats are there. So it's important to recognize it can happen to an extent, but I really don't believe that it could happen on a wide enough scale, unless policy supports it. You know, right now, food from the other side of the world generally costs less than food from the farm down the road. So all of the economic supports have been given to large scale production, corporate owned production, global trade, and by economic supports I mean subsidies, taxes, and regulations that have been favoring the big over the small, and thereby systemically undermining the small, making organic local food more expensive than food produced in an incredibly costly way on the other side of the planet. And you know, food is just one example. This is the same throughout so much of the economy. Building materials, clothing, all of that. Yeah, so for localization really to flourish, we need to make it the most accessible and available option for the majority of the population. Then it's not about getting out there and telling everyone you have to, you know, go against the grain, spend a little bit more money to buy organic food or whatever. It's about making that option the easiest. And we can do that. We can do that with the right political decisions. And that's something that, you know, we always try to get out there as local futures and say it's actually possible. This global system isn't inevitable. It's built on layers upon layers upon layers of skewed subsidies, taxes, and regulations. So if we have favorable politicians, you know, if we have a favorable kind of political movement, I'd say, rather than just individual politicians, we could redirect those and rebuild local economies and cultures all over the country, you know, all over the world, if you like.
Yeah. Do you think that like, so like, you know, initially when I read your article, I was like, yes, yes, yes. And then I thought to myself, like, you know, I log on and then I see ScoMo and these kind of like disappointing politicians. I'm just sort of wondering what you would sort of say to other people like me that, you know, I would love for localization to happen, but like, how should we approach it, you know, in this situation with this kind of conservative government, I guess?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the $1 million question in a way, and I'm not going to pretend that there's any really easy answer. But I can say that local government and municipal governments around the world have been doing some really remarkable things in terms of we work closely with mayors in South Korea, for example, and there the mayor of Seoul said that they would source all of their food for their hospitals and schools from the region. So that's 1 million meals a day or something. Cool. Suddenly, you know, a small policy shift like that can have a pretty big regenerative impact. So I'd say work with local governments and municipal governments as much as possible, because the awareness we can see is trickling up. So it's moved from just the grassroots into more of the policy discussion. We have more politicians interested in our work now than we have had before, for example. But at the same time, politics starts at the grassroots. So if we can spread awareness, if we can engage in this kind of big picture activism at the local, you know, at the grassroots level, we can get out we can birth a new political narrative, one that's not just left or right or, you know, this narrow idea, and actually talks about scale, you know, global versus local, and talks about speed, you know, slowing down, scaling down, and one that recognizes that what we need is localization. It's also one that's not saying this is a blueprint, this has to happen in the same way everywhere. the very, the fact of it is that each community, each bioregion will have to do this in a different way to be, and there will be that diversity. That is what nature is. That is what local ecosystems are. So it's about enabling that. And so, sorry, to come back to the point of transforming politics, we need to be getting out that message, which can, we believe, yeah, we really hope that is a message that can more easily bridge left and right. We are already seeing, lots of conservative voters talking about the need for strong local economies. Circular economies is often the language. It does probably involve shifting the language slightly and not saying like communalism, or not saying, maybe not even saying co-op, saying like community shop, or like just to bridge that, because people in what tend to be rural conservative communities, they understand the need to support local over the global. And they can even engage with that from an ecological perspective because they're on the land more than people in the city. So it is about developing that new political narrative that can really bridge left and right, I'd say.
That's so interesting. Yeah, fully. And like, it's funny because, we like often look at like the National Party, this really like, conservative group, but I went to an abortion talk and they were ones for it because of, regional communities not having access. So it's interesting if we just, rather than group everyone into these kind of like identities and that they won't budge and kind of, I guess, just change the narrative and change the approach and create a little bit of a bridge. That would be, probably most effective.
Yeah, well, can I just speak to that? Because I think that hardening of identities and that kind of fundamentalism is also an effect of the global economy that has made people feel disempowered. It has marginalized, especially rural communities, generation after generation. It has robbed people of their cultural identities, and it has substituted it with a consumer identity that fundamentally is about making you feel insecure so that you buy and buy and buy. So it's made people feel insecure. It's also disconnected people from each other. So they only see the immigrants or the greenies or the lefties or the whoever it is, or the conservatives on a screen, in a disconnected way. But when you rebuild local economies, this is part of the beauty and the difficulties with localization, is that by rebuilding those, you actually put people back into contact with each other, where they see each other for who they are, and it does it. The identity politics starts to drop away, and people are reconnecting around issues that are pertinent to where they are and what's important to them. So I do see that kind of formation of stronger local economies and communities as the real antidote to this kind of extremism and fundamentalism we're starting to see, and really is threatening a lot our political system.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. Just back to sort of the work that you're doing in Ladakh. Is that how you say it? Ladakh.
Ladakh, yeah. There are a few, actually, I've seen there are a few of my Ladakhi friends who have joined, which is so cute. I love that. Je l'ai tant envie.
Because I just wanted to know more about that work and how it's sort of I guess, in action, localization.
Okay. So I'd say there are a lot of people in Ladakh. Ladakh is one example of a place where there are a lot of local people enacting these localization projects. We're seeing especially younger people in Ladakh starting up a restaurant that sources food from their village, actually being really interested in revitalizing the skills of their grandparents. For those who don't know Ladakh, I guess a bit of context is that it was not opened up to the colonial modern economy until the mid-70s, and then over a period of 40 years we've seen corporate globalization take over, as it has in many other communities. So there is already that kind of resurgence of real interest in people, Ladakhi people, taking on that flagship and going with it and rebuilding what is local. Our role there we see as a somewhat, we started there really, questioning the development narrative that was coming in very strongly, saying, you need to, or actually subsidizing agricultural chemicals that were already banned in the West, and having experts come in and say, transition your farming away from the small scale, organic, start using chemicals, and build up the fossil fuel based infrastructure, and progress means moving to the city and not being on the land. All of the media images that came with that, we were saying, this is just, we're trying to give the other side of the story. That's why we call it counter development work. And we started up small scale renewable energy, and strengthening of local organic agriculture back in those days when we were more involved on the ground there. Now we are more of an international organization, but we go back there still bringing that message, still, and also bringing the global picture to the region, and saying, actually, life in the West is not so fantastic as it's still made out to be by so much of the media and shite. And then also working with the tourists there, because there are a lot of tourists who come and see Ladakh, and they might see, oh, this place needs to be developed, or it's poor, or there's so much trash, and we're trying to give the context and say, Ladakh can help you understand what's happened throughout the rest of the world. And so our work is a lot to do with that kind of big picture activism side of it there still. But we're running workshops. We have a lot of my friends here have joined, they're part of our workshops in Ladakh, with local NGOs, still involved in really supporting organic agriculture, which is now, again, Ladakh is an example of where, to an extent, that awareness is trickling up into local politics, and they're supporting organic, fully. So that's a bit of a context, but it's kind of, long story, I guess.
No, it sounds like a really special place, and it's so cute, everyone's waving. I guess did you have anything else you wanted to add before we maybe go to questions? I did have one thing to say, to talk about maybe how important to you is when localizing to use indigenous foods and things like that, practices, I guess.
Well, that relates to your thesis a lot, doesn't it, or your dissertation? That's so awesome. For example, indigenous seeds are so important in climate resilience, in health. They are seeds that are adapted to diverse ecosystems, and they are the legacy of thousands of years of intergenerational wisdom. And like I speak about in the article, what to do when the world is on fire, the knowledge, the place-based understanding of what the land needs, of what an ecosystem needs, and that is something that we must learn from those who still have that knowledge, indigenous people around the world. So for example, with the fires, the traditional fire management practices, I think the whole of Australia pretty much agrees by this point that they're crucial for going forward and for not having the kind of disasters we saw last summer. And of course, localization is very much about supporting that indigenous knowledge where it exists, holding those indigenous seeds before they're lost resisting the corporate monoculture that is being imposed, that is pushing people into a monoculture of the mind, a monoculture of the soil. So it's fundamentally about allowing and empowering that Indigenous knowledge to stay vital. At the same time, it's about settler colonial communities, disconnected communities. It's about allowing the relationships with one another and with the land that will allow a process of re-indigenization, of rebuilding sometimes from scratch. Sometimes we're lucky enough that there is still Indigenous knowledge that is available to learn from. But yeah, that process of reintegrating ourselves, our knowledge systems, our bodies with the earth around us, which is pretty freaking exciting as well. It's, it's where we're going to get a lot of joy and well-being from, and health from, as individuals.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, if anyone hasn't read Dark Emu, this is a little PSA to definitely read Dark Emu and read a lot of the other great books coming out, or that have come out. Sand Talk as well, Call of the Reed Warbler by Charles Massey, that kind of all talk about this kind of thinking that Henry's talking about. Yeah, so I'm just gonna, did you have anything else you were gonna say? Well, I'm just gonna have a look at questions here.
Always. I think, I'd love to hear some questions, but just to note that another really important part of understanding where this localization is coming from, it's questioning progress. It's questioning the idea that Indigenous land-based people were poor or somehow primitive. It's actually involves completely getting rid of those ideas and seeing the value and the wealth in what has existed previously and what still exists on the land, and questioning the idea of progress, or like the idea that we should all be modern and living a certain kind of lifestyle. It's just all. Anyway, let's go to questions. Sorry.
Well, on that, I love the kind of the image of you saying, just in the article again, about why do we need to, use planes that bomb chemical water, like to reduce fires, when we could just literally go back and, empower knowledge that's been completely silent for so long, and that doesn't kill wildlife and everything like that. So I just thought that was a really beautiful way to put it. So we've got a question here from Leah, who says, how do communities with less land resources benefit from localization?
How do communities with less land resources benefit from localization? Does that mean communities that are in the city? Does that mean communities that aren't on the land anymore, who have already been pushed off the land? I'll take it to mean that.
Yeah, I guess people who haven't got access to, I think that's what.
Well, I'll kind of. Yes. Okay, sweet. Well, I mean, the process, again, localization is a process. It's not about us all starting to grow all of our food overnight. Obviously that's not possible in a city, but what is possible is that instead of, getting our oranges from the US and our almonds from California and our bottled water even from England, is a process of supporting re-regionalization of supply chains, shortening the distance between producer and consumer wherever possible. So I think that's actually a really key definition of localization: shortening the distance between producer and consumer wherever possible. So in a city, that would involve more space for local markets, more support for regional producers to bring their produce into the city, rather than putting up a supermarket at every corner, at every street corner. It would mean a process. It would mean
in the process. Sorry. Do you guys talk about it going like domestic and then state and then kind of breaking down in like that kind of a scaling down, or is it more just start regionally and then build out, or?
I mean, it's a good question, and it will look different in every place. It will have to look different in every place. So I'm not going to say there's any one way to do it. But yeah, just that process of shortening wherever possible. There might still be economies, so-called economies of scale, if we're producing certain technologies that we might need. I'm not all about technology, I have to say, but I see the place for a train, manufacturing a train, for example, manufacturing a bicycle. That might happen at a slightly larger scale.
Yeah.
So it's especially in the economies of our basic needs, food, fiber, building materials. That smaller scale is always better for the people who work on those as producers, and for the land where it's produced. So yeah, there's definitely processes that can happen in the city, and a process like Bristol is a good example. Bristol in the UK have a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah.
You can look at our website localfutures.org to see these kind of we have a section called Planet Local, and it shows so many different examples of where it can happen.
Cool.
And but also definitely that process, questioning urbanization above all, stop, allow rural people to stay where they are, stop pushing people, especially in the so-called developing world, in the global south, into cities. This is a process that's still going on because of corporate globalization. So definitely stopping that for a start.
Another question from Miranda. She said, totally agree with the need to build local community and economies, and that given corruption and disempowerment of voters at federal level, e.g., I can't say the rest of what she said, influence of, I think it ran out of space. Yeah. Can you say any more?
No, I can't. Hang on. No,
It's
I can't
very,
see.
very small. No,
Wait, maybe if I.
But Miranda, if you're there, you can write the second half of what you're going to say, if you like.
Yeah.
But I can't really see after that. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Did anyone else have any questions? It's a lot of waves.
Hello, folks. Hey, everyone. What was I going to say? I had plenty of things to say. So much to say.
All the words.
I completely slipped my mind now. I always have that whenever I'm like, oh, I need to remember something important now. It always jumps out of my head.
That's okay. You've done a lot of speaking, for sure. Let me just have a look and see if I have any more questions. Oh, yeah. I was going to say, this is, well, no one else is speaking. Maybe we'll do this as the last question. But, yeah, unless anyone has one they want to type up. But, yeah, so, obviously writing is a really beautiful way for you to express your activism. And, yeah, just another plug. Everyone should read that article. It was really great. On localfutures.org, I think it was, and then The World is on Fire.
What to do when the world is on fire.
Yeah, I think it's the first in the blog. But yeah, is that your main form of, I mean, obviously you do a lot of organizing as well, but what other ways do you like to express yourself? Yeah, I guess on this course, is there any other form that you go through, I guess? Yeah.
Well, it's actually, sorry, my phone just did that, 20% battery thing.
Yeah. All good.
Yeah, so actually I love speaking. Speaking is something I haven't got the chance to do that much of. It's something
I asked you to come along and speak.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks everyone for listening as well. I guess, in terms of the question, writing is something I've been cultivating a lot. I've been working with my boss, my mentor, Helena Norberg Hodge, a lot. She writes and she's been kind of training me up. So thanks for mentioning the article. For those who, it's something I put a lot of thought into because and have been writing over a few months. In terms of processing,
it feels like you've been thinking about it for a while. Just the way when you read something and you're like, that was really beautifully it was like a full journey. I thought that was really cool.
Thank you.
To start with the kind of the memory of you and then the fires, and then kind of go into some more kind of complex thinking stuff, which is really cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, basically, it's because I think a lot of us watching here are younger people. I think we're all in the same boat, is that we just cannot accept this rhetoric that it's all fucked already, you know, to be blunt. Like, we cannot
Yeah.
accept even even the scientific establishment that says you've got 7 years left or whatever it is. It's like, well, no, this can go a lot. This can go worse. You know, this isn't. You know, we could continue down a path that takes us into bubble cities and high tech everything, and tries to provide all our food and oxygen through automated systems. And there's another way. You know, there is an opportunity to take it into our own hands, and that means being empowered by localizing economic policy to take it into our own hands, to get back onto the land and to start regenerating, to start rebuilding those local cultures, those local food systems and the ecosystems. So yeah, what was I going to say about that? Also just to
Interesting.
yeah, sorry. Also just to say that it's like really already happening. You know, there are many examples from all around the world where this is being implemented, and it's often not something that can be measured in a quantified way, because it's happening on the small scale in a different way. You know, even something like regenerative agriculture, there's no blanket term. It has to be about reintegrating with an ecosystem. It has to be about diversification, and that means there's no formula. So it can't be measured, and it can't enter the data-driven policy discussions. It can't even really enter the mainstream scientific imaginary yet. I mean, I hope it will, and you know, it's definitely beginning to. But it can't. The power of these methods and the how to say, the unpredictability of the natural world is not something we have ever understood. We can't pretend we do. What we can do is rebuild an economics of humility, an economics that respects the diversity of the living world, an economics of localization that that allows us to become humble servants to that process of life once again, you know, and allows us to input our know-how, you know, our hands, our brains, our hearts, and our technological genius even into maximizing regeneration while providing for human needs. It's more than possible.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, it's so exciting.
Yeah, so just wanted to add that we don't hear nearly enough about what is going on at the grassroots all around the world. We don't hear it through mainstream media. If you flick on the TV, you won't see it. A little bit more after COVID, but not near, you know. In our organization, we're getting good news stories of this project and that project from this corner of the world and that corner of the world every week. You know, multiple times a week, there are new things happening, and it's not getting out there. It fundamentally, yeah, obviously is a massive threat to the corporate establishment, and there are those vested interests as reasons why it might not be getting out there. But that's part of big picture activism, is really educating ourselves on what's going on and spreading that message, because we're not getting it from the mainstream. So yeah, another cause for optimism, really. There's also La Via Campesina, a peasants movement around the world. It's the biggest social movement in the world, and it's fundamentally about food sovereignty and resisting corporate globalization. So you know, it's happening. It's happening.
It's really exciting. Taking back the food. It's so exciting. Cool. Well, thank you so much for tonight. It was so nice. Yeah, and is the best way for everyone to sort of, you know, if people want to find out more, would you refer them to the Economics of Happiness and Local Futures, or is there sort of another way to get involved? Or
yeah, totally. Yeah, I'd say definitely check out localfutures.org. We have a ton of resources on that website if you're interested in exploring more. We have the Economics of Happiness, the documentary that I mentioned kind of changed my life when I was younger. That's available for free to view on filmsforaction.org. So yeah, that documentary is there available. Great resource, educational resource, and resource for big picture activists. Yeah, I think that's all I can think of at the moment. I'm often not good at thinking what I
Okay.
should be like plugging, but I think we're done.
Yeah.
We're done good on
I
that
mean,
front as well.
on an action level, as individuals, we can shop local and support local farmers at the moment, in this moment, anyways. I guess.
Totally, yeah, of course. There's always those individual actions, which we're always saying there's the individual actions, but then they are so magnified if you do it with just a small group of like-minded others. So even if you're growing food in your back garden, it's so much more joyful if you're doing it with a friend from down the road. It's so much more transformative when a group of people get together and think, what can we do to support our own well-being and the well-being, and the well-being of our community, of an ecosystem. That kind of questioning in a small group is what is giving rise to all of these localization projects that are flourishing even against the grain of the corporate system. I also just had this thought, I think it's kind of a random thought, but I think it's important to note that that art as well is a force for change in a way, and in a way integrating art with the resources that are around us as well, or even localizing art practices, and I don't know, just protesting in that way as well. But yeah, so we always say connect with a group of others to do it, and it really magnifies the individual action, and it can lead into those, what we say, resist and renew, like resistance and renewal, that are really key forms of activism in this time. So.
No, that's perfect. Thank you so much. We did pretty good on time, 7:20.
Yeah, it's gone quickly.
I know.
Oh, I see
look
so
back
many of my
before.
friends. I see a lot of my
I know.
friends joining. That's so sweet. Thank you guys for coming, and
Lots
all
of
of
people
those who I haven't met as well.
Yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in. And huge thank you to Henry for speaking for so beautifully and for so long about this topic that's so interesting and obviously not covered enough. Yeah, thank you so much. And
thanks, Lucy, for doing what you're doing with the Green Team. You're like an example of that big picture activism that we need. So yeah, thanks, and keep going.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye, everyone. Cheers.
Bye.
Good night.